The burden of proof is backwards, a transdualistic systems critique. The burden of proof lies on the person making the claim. You've heard this your entire life. In debates and arguments online, it's treated as gospel, an unquestionable principle of rational discourse. But what if I told you this rule, onus probandi incumbit, a quate dicit, dicit, whatever. It's not just incomplete, but fundamentally backwards. That it's intellectual laziness disguised as rigor, and that this laziness is destroying our ability to think about problems that matter the most. Today, we're going to use transdualistic systems theory to dismantle one of the most sacred cows of Western epistemology. Act 1. How we think it works. Here's the traditional story. Someone makes a claim. The claim disrupts the neural baseline of knowledge. Since they're the ones disrupting the equilibrium, they have to prove their assertion. The questioner, they're just passively defending the status quo. They're not making any claims themselves. It sounds reasonable. It's been codified in law, philosophy, science. It's how we teach critical thinking. There's just one problem. There is no neutral baseline. When you're dealing with living systems and human dialogue is absolutely a living system, every action changes the entire field, including questioning, especially questioning. Let me give you an example. Someone says, I think we should take climate change more seriously. You respond, prove it. Prove that climate change is real and caused by humans. And the traditional model, you've done absolutely nothing. You're just asking reasonable questions, but here's what you've actually done. You've redirected the conversation's energy. You've introduced doubt into the semantic field. You've implicitly asserted that the status quo is fine, that inaction is the neutral position, and that your skepticism deserves no justification. You've forced the other person onto the defense while you sit back with zero obligations. You've extracted cognitive labor without contributing any. This is what I call epistemic parasitism, and it's everywhere. Act 2. The three failures of traditional burden of proof. The traditional model fails in three fundamental ways. First, it assumes dialogue happens in isolation. It treats claims like billiard balls, discrete objects that appear from nowhere and collide with other objects. But in reality, every idea emerges from a web of context, prior knowledge, cultural narratives, power structures, shared experiences. When you demand someone prove their claim without acknowledging this relational ecosystem, you're forcing them to rebuild the entire web every single time. You're pretending you stand outside the system looking in, when you're actually deeply embodied in it. Second, it treats truth seeking as combat. The metaphor is revealing. Burden of proof comes from the legal context where there are adversaries, but where someone wins and someone loses. This made sense for courtrooms with binary outcomes, but it's catastrophic for open-minded question building, knowledge building. Truth isn't something you conquer from an opponent. It's something that emerges from collaboration. It's a pattern of resonance that develops when multiple perspectives collaborate together, or calibrate together. Uh, the adversarial model works in an area of material scarcity, where resources had to be fought over, but information isn't scarce. Our crisis now is coordinating collective intelligence in the face of civilizational threats, and adversarial epistemology actively prevents that. Third, it privileges denial as a zero-cost position. This is the most insidious failure. Under the traditional rule, I can question endlessly without ever having to articulate my own position, provide counter-evidence, state what would change my mind, acknowledge cumulative evidence, do any generative work whatsoever. I just keep saying prove it until you're exhausted, and when you give up, I get to claim I won the debate. Watch this pattern in climate denial, vaccine skepticism, election fraud claims, any contentious public issue. One side provides evidence, the other side says not good enough, prove it again, more evidence, still not convinced, and so on forever. The questioner is farming the commons, extracting the value of appearing thoughtful and rigorous while contributing nothing. Eventually, good faith participants burn out, the discourse degrades. The epistemic environment becomes toxic. Act 3. The Hitler-Nazi parallel. Let me give you an analogy that makes this pattern visceral. We often focus enormous amounts of attention on Hitler's evil. We study his psychology, his rhetoric, his decisions, and yes, Hitler was monstrous. But here's the question: what if Hitler had given the exact same speeches in 1920s Switzerland or Denmark? He would have been the local town drunk. Nobody would have listened. Hitler wasn't the cause. He was a signal that found a pre-tuned amplification system. The Weimar Republic's economic collapse, the humiliation of Versailles, widespread anti-Semitism, the breakdown of democratic institutions, these create a resonant cavity where certain frequencies would amplify while others would die out. The Nazis weren't just following orders. They were the amplification system. Without their willing participation, their passive enabling, their structural support, Hitler would have remained inaudible. This is systems thinking. Causation doesn't work like billiard ball, where Hitler hits Germany and fascism pops out. It works through resonance and feedback loops. The cause is inseparable from the conditions that amplify it. Now here is the connection. When we assign all blame to Hitler alone, we're making the same reductionist error as the traditional burden of proof. We're collapsing a complex systematic phenomenon onto a single node. We're pretending the amplifiers were neutral, that they bore no responsibility, that all the onus falls on the individual who initiated the signal. But that's not how systems work. That's not how evil works. And that's not how knowledge works either. Little side note, and that's why I'm not liable for any of my damn opinions. I don't give a damn. I will fight that tooth and nail in every court on this damn planet. Not that I will ever intend or unintentionally intend to cause such effects. I keep a critical thinking, introspective awareness to try to keep an ethical perspective so I don't slide down these paths and encourage these behaviors and pathogenic systems. So, Act 4, Transdualistic Systems Theory. So what's the alternative? Enter transdualistic systems theory. Transdualism rejects simple binaries in favor of relational emergence. Instead of isolated objects bumping into each other, you have nodes in a network, all mutually co-creating the system state. Applied to epistemology, the study of knowledge, this means claims and questions are both perturbations to the semantic field. When you make a claim, you introduce a signal. When you question it, you're not passively receiving that signal, you're introducing a counter signal that redirects the field's topology. Both actions have energetic costs. Both reshape the possibility space. Both require justification. Truth emerges from resonance, not conquest. Instead of one side winning by defeating the other, understanding develops when multiple perspectives collaborate together. It's more like jazz than combat. Each player contributes to emerging harmony, and silence or noise makes the music impossible. All participants share epistemic responsibility. If you enter the dialogue, whether to claim, question, or observe, you're part of the cognitive ecology. You're altering its state. You therefore share responsibility for maintaining its health. This gives us a new principle to replace the old one. Onus participationis, incumbit, omnibus in relationale. The responsibility of participation belongs to all who are in relation. Or more simply, if you're in the conversation, you're in the work. Act 5. What does this actually look like in practice? So what does co-responsibility actually look like? How do you implement this? For claimants, you still need to articulate your position clearly. You still provide evidence, but you're not Atlas holding up the entire weight of verification alone. For questioners, this is where things really change. Your obligations now include articulate what specifically you're doubting and why. Provide counter evidence if you're asserting an alternative. State what would change your mind. Acknowledge where points are adequately addressed. Do generative work, not just extractive critique. Let me show you the difference. Parasitic questioning. Prove vaccines are safe. No, that study's not good enough. What about this edge case? I'm just asking questions. Generative questioning. I'm concerned about the long-term effects we haven't seen. here's why, specific mechanisms, what evidence addresses this specific concern, and here's what would resolve my doubt. See the difference? The second version does work. It narrows the scope. It creates convergence criteria. It participates in truth seeking rather than just extracting from it. For observers, this is crucial. And this is crucial. Even if you're not directly participating, you're shaping the field. You amplify certain voices. This is especially true in social media and the, cargo cult and personality cult dynamics. In a systems term, you're never truly outside the system. Your observation affects what you observe. For institutions, this requires redesigning epistemic architectures, peer review that requires critics to propose testable alternatives, debate formats that reward collaboration over point scoring, reputation systems that track epistemic reciprocity, educational models that teach co-inquiry instead of adversarial debate. The goal is to make parasitism costly and co-responsibility adaptive. Act 6. Why this matters now. You might be thinking, this is interesting philosophy, but how does it matter practically? Because we're living through civilizational coordinational problems where adversarial epistemology is actively killing us. Climate change. Every year we spend in prove it debates is a year of rising emissions. This parasitic pattern, question endlessly, contribute nothing, demand infinite evidence, has burned decades while the system degrades. AI safety. We're heading toward potentially transformative AI with existential risks, but the discourse is often paralyzed between sides demanding the other prove their position while offering only negation. Both sides need to articulate positive models with testable implications. Democratic discourse. Polarization accelerates when each side weaponizes prove it, while contributing nothing constructive. Right demands left prove itself, left demands right prove itself. Everyone exhausts themselves, and in that exhaustion, authoritarianism walks. Pandemic response. We watched it in real time as parasitic skepticism about vaccine max and public health measures extracted endless energy from scientists and healthcare workers who had to reprove basic points again and again to people operating in bad faith. Counter response to that there were people operating in critically thinking good faith regarding the skepticism around the pandemic as well, and that this would be a perfect example of bias injected in the algorithm, into the AI. The pattern is the same. The traditional burden of proof creates an asymmetry that rewards extraction and punishes contribution. The privilege's denial over construction. It treats dialogue as combat rather than collaboration. And in an era where our survival depends on coordinating our collective intelligence, that's not just wrong, it's lethal. Act 7, the deeper shift. There's something even deeper happening here. The burden of proof embodies a metaphysics, a view of how reality works, that no longer serves us. It's the metaphysics of isolated individuals in competition, where truth is a scarce resource to be conquered, where knowledge is property to be defended, where understanding is victory over an opponent. Really quick, I had to add on to this. But that's sort of the problem. That's sort of the state of the world we're living in, with all this, hyper-capitalism, freaking Protestant work ethic, this burnout culture, all this polarization, all this individualism. It creates a culture of, isolated individuals. I am one of those isolated individuals. I've come to the realization recently that I'm basically a half feral child. I'm an adult, but, I'm half feral in essence because half of my entire lifespan has been spent in such extreme social isolation that we really need to expand the scope. We can't just have scientists, and sociologists looking into, freaking feral children and getting into the Jungian, mythological aspects of it. And, we need to do some deep work and expand the horizons, because in this age of hikikomoris, hermits, digital isolation, physical isolation, all this isolation, this is a very serious, real issue that we are facing. So back to the topic. This made intuitive sense in an era of material scarcity and tribal competition. but we're not in this world anymore. That's where we're at the cusp. Where we can either, the AI and could either break nuclear fusion and we could have complete paradigm shifts in our existential and ontological state of being, or it could go the other way and it could just doom us all. Or it can go splintering off in all these hybrid directions. There are many different ways. People don't talk about the third options, the hybrid splintering offs. But this is where we are on that cusp where, I'm starting to see it here in the first world, or it's not really first world in America anymore. It is and it isn't. That's what I'm saying. It's the edge. It's the cusp. It's, the critical mass that we need to get in the right direction, because we're living in this space where we have people living in America living in privilege, yet feeling like they have no privilege, no, freedom of, none of that, freedom for, freedom to find a happiness in your life, the constitutional ideals, none of that, So we live in this fractured, splintered, psychological splitting, zone, this mentality of existence where, like me, I'm living in Section 8 housing, but I recognize I'm pretty fucking privileged. Even if you look at this camera and you look at the way the room looks, it doesn't look fucking falling apart and terrible and black mold on it. I'm pretty privileged to have found housing and to found housing that works for me, being an autistic neurodivergent philosopher and all this and that. But at the same time, I can't help but go, I'm still stuck inside. There's still no social networks, still no community, still no society, still no government. There's nothing that works. But yet, it could get to that paradigm shift where everything could start working again. But we need to get that philosophical, metaphysical, systems level thinking, because the AI is not going to do all that work for us. So, back to the point. We live in a world of informational abundance, networked intelligence, existential interdependence, a collective action and problems that can't be solved adversarially. The shift transdualistic systems theory represents from the hero's journey to the ecosystem's emergence, from the individual protagonist conquering challenges to all participants co-creating conditions for flourishing. In the old model, the burden falls on the hero. In the new model, every organism shares in maintaining the health of the whole. This isn't naive optimism. It's recognizing the complex adaptive systems require distributed intelligence, and distributed intelligence requires distributed responsibility. You can't coordinate a collective problem solving while treating every interaction as a zero-sum game. Act 8. Objections and responses. Let me address the obvious objection. Doesn't this lead to infinite regress? If I question your claim and you demand I prove my question and I question your demand, don't we spiral forever? The transdualistic answer. Healthy epistemic ecologies naturally converge. When both parties operate in good faith, contributing evidence, acknowledging points, refining positions, the dialogue reaches equilibrium. It's like a dampened harmonic oscillator. The amplitude decreases with each cycle until you rest at a shared understanding. The infinite regress only happens when someone operates in bad faith, withholding reciprocity. But here's the key. The traditional model hides this pathology by design. It treats infinite skepticism as the questioner's right. The co-responsibility model makes bad faith visible. If somebody keeps questioning without ever contributing, everyone can see that they're parasiting the commons. The system can adapt, exclude them, stop feeding them energy, redirect to more generative participants. Another objection. What about cranks, flat earthers? Don't we need the burden of proof to dismiss obvious nonsense? Yes, some claims are so far outside the established framework that they do require extraordinary evidence. But notice, we're appealing to a shared framework, a collective attractor that shapes what counts as reasonable. The framework itself is a systemic product. It emerges from countless prior dialogues. It's maintained by the entire epistemic community. So even in dismissing cranks, we're not operating as isolated skeptics, but as participants in a knowledge ecology. The burden still distributes. It's just that the crank is asking us to overturn an enormous accumulated weight, so their share is proportionally larger. Conclusion. So here's where we've arrived. Traditional burden of proof is a relic. I'm not even going to attempt the Latin. Just autism tongue is not working today. So the traditional burden of proof is a relic of adversarial reductionist thinking. It treats knowledge as isolated objects, dialogue as combat, and questioning as a zero-cost position. Just got me thinking in parallels with nonviolent communication, Dialogue is combat, Even the intellectuals are so damn dumb that they can't get out of frickin' jackal language, and can't speak damn giraffe. Come on, people, speak giraffe. So, But in living systems, in actual human sense-making, every action perturbs the field. Claims and questions both reshape the possibility space. Truth emerges from resonance, not conquest. Therefore, epistemic responsibility must distribute. Everyone in the dialogue shares in the work of verification, clarification, and calibration. This isn't just fairer, it's more accurate to how knowledge actually develops, and it's essential for the kinds of collective intelligence we need to navigate civilizational scale challenges. You see? And this is where John Vervaeke and the 4E cognitive science comes into play. Get into that cognitive science, get into that 4E cognitive science, and start to understand the unfolding, emerging process that is coming, that is unveiling itself before our very eyes. The shift from epistemology as combat to epistemology as jazz, from the burden falling on individuals to responsibility shared across the ecology, from truth as property to truth as an emergent pattern. See, this is where I say, if life, if existence is a transjective phenomenon, then truth itself is manipulation. That's just the relationship of natures. There's healthy manipulation and unhealthy manipulation. There's codependency, and there's not even a word for the kind of, humanistic dependency of being a social animal, So, it's a shift we desperately need, because the adversarial model isn't just inefficient, it's actively preventing us from thinking together about the things that matter most. And this is where I'm making the claim. The claim. I don't know. It's a claim, it isn't a claim. What the fuck? It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'll just use that word, the claim, but I'm not using the word claim as a philosophical or academic sense of the word claim. So I will make the claim that Western philosophy, that Western culture, has retarded our species' advancement of philosophy through this absurd little rule, through this absurd little dogma. So, So the next time someone says the burden of proof is on you, you can respond, actually, if you're in this conversation, the burden of proof is on both of us. Now, what are you bringing to the table? What am I bringing to the table? Closing. I am sage divorced. I believe the way we are thinking about thinking is broken. But I think it can be fixed if we're willing to do the work together. Thanks for thinking with me. So, yeah, that was just my little recent little thesis kind of thing. My recent little... not memo, what is it called? Manifesto, Manifesto, thesis, whatever, The point is that it's that hidden wisdom, that movement from understanding to understand, that progress, that movement from understanding to understanding. That's a real thing, man. I'm going, this isn't just cognitive science thing. This is that, Rastafarian, concept, but this Rastafarian concept of understanding and understanding, it actually has a lot of, parallels with the 4E cognitive science, because, this is the difference between knowing something and having something click. Everybody, I don't care about how neurotypical you are, it seems everybody understands that one when I say that to people. The difference between knowing something and having it fully click. When something's fully clicking, that's you moving beyond understanding and into understanding. It might even be you progressing through understanding into a state of overstanding. So, anyway, just had to share this little video on this whole, burden of proof and what an absurd, retardation it has been upon our species. So, anyway, this has been Sage DeForest. Peace and victory. Signing out.